I'm Jerry Picardi. Welcome to Round the Cracker Barrel.
And I'm Bruce Lane. We're here tonight with Senator Brian Joyce to update us on what's going on up on the hill north of us here and whatever's going to affect Avon. Welcome again to Around the Cracker Barrel, Brian.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. I'm delighted to join you two. I didn't get the memo about wearing the color-coordinated shirt. Had I known. I knew not to wear a tie, having been on this show a few times in the past. But nice to be here.
Well, it's nice to have you here. So, what is going on?
Well, we just completed a 2-year legislative session. And, in my tenure, I think it was perhaps our most productive. We had, again, some significant fiscal challenges. Here we were starting fiscal year 13, started in July of 2012, and we still didn't have as much revenue as we had back in 2008. We had at the beginning of the Great Recession, because when fewer people were working, fewer people were paying income taxes, fewer people buying goods, so that's less sales tax and the like. So we've had 4 or 5 very challenging years because costs, of course, continue to rise. We survived this Great Recession, I think, better than any other state in the Union. We were fortunate that we didn't have the depth of the recession as some other states had. We're not as dependent, for example, on speculative housing in some other sectors that were hard hit. And in fact, we had some sectors like biotech, life sciences, our hospitals, our great universities that remained quite strong and helped us through. And also, I think we had done some very prudent planning. We had socked away more money for a rainy day than any other state, proportionally any other state in the Union. And so we were able to fall back on that savings. And we took action right away and made cuts right away, and didn't engage in the fiscal shenanigans you saw in some other states like California, where they borrowed, essentially paid for their operating costs on a credit card, which is unsustainable. So we passed a budget in July, a fiscal 13 budget, which was balanced as it must be on the state level. We don't have the deficit spending you have in Washington. And it actually, despite these challenges, brought more money back into Avon than ever before, a significant increase. I think it was about 8%, more money into the schools, into the town government, keep pressure off the local property taxes. We also increased the highway funding these past 2 years. They call it Chapter 90, the money that comes back for roads and bridges was up 38% over 2 years ago, the highest ever. So that money we did have, we prioritized an awful lot of it, brought it back to the communities. We also had some very significant legislation that passed in this session. You recall that in 2006, Massachusetts became the first state to have universal health care coverage, or near universal. We now provide health insurance to about 98% of our legal residents. And the greater challenge was to try to rein in costs. It's easier to provide the coverage. Now, how do we control costs? And we passed a healthcare cost containment bill that we estimate over the next 15 years will save some $200 billion, really a staggering sum. And if we didn't do so, healthcare costs were soon to be over half of all state spending and increasing going forward, so as to obviate our ability to do anything else really that you want to do for education or public safety or the environment. Same thing was happening on the town government level. It was also happening to our businesses and to our families. The number one cause of bankruptcy for families is healthcare costs. So we passed a measure. I'm vice chair of the Healthcare Financing Committee. It was the folks that were involved, all the different stakeholders. It was like herding cats, because you had the medical professionals, the hospitals, the insurers, the business community, the municipal leaders, just all kinds of stakeholders. And we passed a bill that I think for the first time provides the proper incentive to, rather than just, Bruce, get another X-ray or another MRA, the fee-for-service model. Now we're going to be promoting healthier outcomes, and maybe some preventative medicine, maybe some better nutrition, maybe we could all, lose a few pounds.
Exercise
and
more, yeah.
Exercise. So paying more for outcomes. And that was perhaps the most significant bill we had this session. First, the budget, of course, and then second, the healthcare financing. And there were several other bills I can talk to you about as well.
Well, like the casino.
Gambling was
a big.
We did, and just to bring people back on that, the question to me was not whether we were going to have gambling in Massachusetts. We've had that since the 70s when the voters passed the weekly number drawings.
The lottery.
Voted by referendum to have the lottery, but that's been instructive too to see how much that's expanded from that single weekly drawing in the 70s to now. Megabucks and scratch tickets, and
there's got to be 70 different scratch tickets down there now.
So we become dependent on that revenue source. What happened was the federal government gave recognition to the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and under federal law, that meant that the Mashpee Wampanoags were almost certainly going to be able to have some form of gambling. So our job was to get out in front of it, create a regulatory framework that ensured best practices that were adopted from the other almost 45 states or so that now have gambling, and also ensure the state gets a significant sum of money. We're expecting really hundreds of millions of dollars and potentially 15,000 jobs or so for 3 destination resort casinos, one here in the southeastern part of the state, one in the Boston region that spreads all the way out to
like Worcester or something, yeah.
And then one out in the western part of the state. So we're looking at 3 casinos at the most, up to is the limit, and then one racetrack will have slots.
I understand in Springfield they had three developers putting forth programs there.
I've read that too, Jerry. And what's happened, one of the things we did in the legislation, again, it was something we had to do. I don't think it was. It was inevitable that there was going to be some form of gambling. And by the way, we did study quite a bit and came to a legitimate, objective calculation that we were losing over $1 billion a year of Massachusetts citizens spending and gambling in
Connecticut and Rhode Island, yeah.
But I'm not a big gambler. I don't particularly enjoy it, and I do recognize the serious hazards to a lot of families. And this bill, we think, tries to adopt the best practices and prevent some of the worst practices that we've seen in other states. And one of the things we did, there's been a history really of corruption in gambling and public officials for 50 years around the country. What we did is we set up an independent commission. Once this was passed, put it all over to them, and there's such incredible regulatory oversight. Took it away from the legislature, so I'll have no say in which of those 3 proposals in Springfield, if any, is adopted, and same in southeastern Mass or in Boston. That's going to be done, openly, honestly, transparently by this special commission. We didn't want any part of it. We put the framework in place and then let the experts do it.
Now the Wampanoags, is that going to be, if they open a casino, is it going to be one of the 3, or is that going to be a separate one?
That's the idea.
That they'd be one of the 3. Huh?
And now there was just a recent decision by the federal government that's thrown a little monkey wrench in that. But ultimately, that's the idea.
Because otherwise you end up with too much competition.
Right.
And then there's going to be a slot parlor, or there's going to be a
one of the
gambling
tracks,
entity?
One of the tracks will be able to have slots, and whether that's Plainridge or Taunton Raynham or
even Suffolk Downs.
Suffolk Downs. A lot of people think Suffolk Downs might be a favorite to get one of the casino locations, but time will tell. But we also passed a significant economic development or jobs bill, and one of my favorite quotes was from Tip O'Neill, where he said the 3 most important things about politics were jobs, jobs, and jobs. And we're fortunate now in Massachusetts. We've one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, of hovering around 6%. The rest of the country's around 8%. But you know, if you're one of those 6% that's unemployed, or still more that's underemployed, you know, that's a tough road to hoe. So we're working pretty hard to try to create jobs and create a framework to promote jobs. And you know, we do it through some targeted tax cuts and promoting growth. And you know, over next door in Easton, for example, the downtown, the Ames Shovel Works was going to be destroyed by a couple of local guys, and the state came in and partnered with the town, and they're going to rebuild that whole downtown, preserve the last 150 years of history, but really create the next 100 years of history there, and create a lot of jobs and affordable, I mean, some good quality, nice housing. And there are other ways, and in fact, I'm hoping in a couple of weeks to be able to come back and tell my friends in Avon, I've been working hard to try to obtain a state grant for a downtown revitalization right here where we are in the studios. I'd like to bring in some significant, we're talking significant state funds to rebuild the downtown and the, you know, the streetscape and the infrastructure. And you know, just down the street in Randolph, I've been able to secure three of these grants now, almost $4 million, and you see the whole downtown Crawford Square in Randolph getting revitalized. And we've done it in other communities, and that public investment then leverages private investment. It brings people in to open local shops, brings some vitality back to the downtown, and you might be looking at town meeting to have a mixed use zoning, so promote mixed use of housing. And
like the old-fashioned neighborhoods, retail on the first floor, you live upstairs.
That's, you know, that's what they call it now. It's back to the future. You're right. They call that smart growth, where you want to have your commercial and retail and professional and residential uses together, peacefully coexisting, each for the benefit of the other.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to walk out the door and grab call it the 5-minute ice cream test. Walk out your door and be able to grab an ice cream cone in 5 minutes. It's also good for that vendor to have, that shopkeeper to have the built-in customer
right
base.
there. Yeah.
One thing leads to another, actually.
Yeah. So we're promoting that, and I'm trying to push a little bit of that with my partners here on the Avon Board of Selectmen, and see what we can do to help revitalize this downtown.
Well, that would be good.
One of the things, there were a couple of provisions. Now, I happen to chair the bonding committee that in the Senate. I sit on a Ways and Means that does the operating budget, and then the long-term spending goes to the bonding committee that I chair. And I told you the healthcare financing I was the vice chair of that, and we're going to talk about the transportation bill and the vice chair of that committee too. So it was a busy period for me. But one of the things I added in this economic development bill was I created something called an S Corp, which you learn about these things sometimes from interesting ways. This came from a mom of a boy on my son's baseball team. So in fact her husband was the coach, and she started telling me about something called an S Corp. We're all familiar with a C corporation or an S corporation or a PC or a LLC. This is called a B Corp, a benefit corporation. And what that means is a officer or director in one of these companies could take into account the benefit to the community, primarily the environmental impact of a decision made by this corporation, and not just exclusively focus on maximizing shareholder wealth. And he or she could do so without breaching their fiduciary duty to the shareholders.
Right.
And it's kind of a new form of governance.
It's a twist, yeah.
I got this, we passed this, and it was adopted into law. And my thinking is, frankly, it's not only good social policy, it could be good economic policy, because there are a lot of socially conscious investors out there that want to invest in companies. So these companies will have like a good housekeeping seal of approval, like a LEED certified building. We know that means it's environmentally a certain standard. Well, one of these companies has to reach certain standards. I had another provision in this economic development bill that passed the Senate, not the House. I'm bringing it back. I'm working with the former Governor Romney's former Secretary of Environmental Affairs, with the current Secretary of Environmental Affairs, the Secretary of Economic Affairs and Mass Development. I'm going to be filing legislation to create $1 billion lending pool for commercial and industrial properties to retrofit their buildings and make them far more energy efficient. There's been so much focus on creating new and alternative forms of energy. We actually think there's more bang for your buck to reduce the energy expenditures on our existing buildings,
right.
particularly commercial and industrial. And so think of the Avon Industrial Park. If we could provide access to 3% money, and this is what we're intending to do, we think this bond would have a AAA rate, would cost the taxpayers nothing. Be able to have a pool of 3% money, 2.75% money for the town of Avon, 3% for the private businesses, to fund energy retrofits for lighting, heating, air conditioning, insulation,
the whole thing, yeah.
And here's what that does. It reduces the carbon footprint. It reduces carbon emissions, and it saves money for that property owner that he or she can put back into the business or into hiring, creating jobs. But what it also does is it provides much needed jobs for our friends in the building trades, for fellows that, might be a carpenter or an electrician or a plumber. We estimate this first $1 billion offering will create over 10,000 jobs, and think that's a very realistic estimate. In fact, might be conservative. And these aren't jobs that can be done by somebody from China or someplace else. Not going to be able to come out and retrofit.
Got to be local.
Your building, local. So, an Avon guy could be working over in the Avon Industrial Park, and the owner of the property, the Avon Industrial Park, is saving money, and it helps him hire more Avon people, and they might go to the local store to buy their supplies. It creates jobs downstream. That's probably my number one initiative for next year, remembering Tip O'Neill's advice that it's jobs, jobs, jobs. Yeah. So I want to help keep this recovery going. In addition to, so we've talked about the healthcare financing, talked a little bit about the transportation bond bill, and there were a number of projects here in Avon that we specifically earmarked for further work. Talked about increased road and bridge money, talked about more money coming in for the schools in the town, talked about the casino gambling, and about the economic development bill. Another bill we passed was named Melissa's Law, after this poor girl who was killed years ago. More recently, there was a police officer up in Woburn who was killed by a habitual offender who was out on parole.
Christmas time.
That was a Christmas one,
yes,
right?
So this young woman, Melissa, her dad actually works in Milton, and I think her mom may have been a teacher once upon a time in Randolph. What this bill does, so it really credit to them and to him to honor his daughter's memory, to push for a change in the law. And we did change the law so that some person who has been convicted 3 times, it's a 3 strikes and you're out bill, 3 times of particularly dangerous, violent crimes, you're never getting parole. So that such a person's not going to, and that's the type of person that killed that police officer up in Woburn. So we passed that. We just passed a long-term care insurance bill for many of our seniors that afford some protections in that area. I'll think of more, but it was a pretty productive session.
Some busy times up there.
Yeah, you've had quite a bit going on there. Now,
Brian, if I could ask you a question, if we could go back a little bit on the health insurance, is that a mandatory program? Is everyone in the Commonwealth required to be insured?
Since 2006, everyone in Massachusetts has been required to have some form of insurance. And that's really the only way it works, Jerry, is the, because you want to spread the risk, you know. And so the idea back in 2006, and honestly, I'm a little sorry to see Governor Romney run away from it, because he had a part in this bill, and I think it was a pretty good bill, actually. It's worked, and it is what the national program is modeled after. It's kind of, think of it like a three-legged stool. The old way of doing things was just to have the government pay for everything. And yet, this was a little bit of a different approach. Yes, there's a government role and a government cost. Sometimes those costs are actually less than they would be if the person didn't have insurance and just went to the emergency room, which the free care pool would pick up. But in addition to the government, there's a business role here, in that businesses of more than, I think it's more than 11 employees, have to offer some package for their employees. It doesn't have to be overly generous. And it was interesting, I remember we heard from businesses at the time that wanted this, because the responsible employers that were providing coverage were competing for work, bidding for work against companies that weren't providing insurance for their workers. And in fact, if they were in the free care pool, the competitor was paying for his own guys and the other guys. So they said, hey, let's level the playing field. And the third part is there's an individual responsibility. And the idea was that if you have, you can afford a cell phone bill, you can pay for your cable, you can kick in a little bit toward your health coverage. So it's a three-way approach. But the rising costs were just swallowing up government, business, individual, families. And so that was the second part. That was the challenge that we took on 6 years later, or this year. So in 2006, we were the first state in the country to have this coverage for everybody, something that, going back to Harry Truman, a lot of leaders have sought to do. And I think Governor Romney, being part of it, should be taking bows rather than running away from it. And then the second part is this year's challenge, the far greater challenge, to control costs. And I think Governor Patrick deserves an awful lot of credit for leading this effort.
So I think he's done a good job at it. I
think he's been an excellent governor. And, when he first came in, he had a little bit of a learning curve. I think he's been an excellent governor. And, he happens to be my next door neighbor, too. So, we've been pals for 20 years. But, I've seen a number of governors, and he has been thoroughly engaged. And, again, just this past session, I rattled off some of the legislation. Pretty significant stuff.
Yeah, and he's been
in a
involved
challenging
in
time.
all of it.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. One of the things when you're talking about the buildings and that money that might be available, is that also going to include like alternative energy? If, say, a building owner decides to put solar on his roof and stuff like that?
I suspect it would. However, we already have such programs in place.
Yeah, but aren't those going away? Like, don't the credits disappear this year or next year?
Well, there's a little back and forth on that, and it's not quite that simple. You're talking about something called SRECs, and whether the state credit and the federal credit, and the, I think this year there's a doubling of the depreciation allowance that goes away. So it's a little bit beyond my pay grade in terms of all the accounting that accompanies these, particularly you're talking now about solar installations. There is clearly a government policy, both in the federal and the state level, to promote the alternative energy. And here in Massachusetts, we're one of about, I don't know if it's 15 or 16 states that's deregulated our electricity. I think we did it back in 1998. So do you remember years ago, you used to get your telephone service from New England Telephone and your long distance from AT&T. And then Judge Green broke up Ma Bell.
Yeah, broke up monopoly.
And you could buy your long distance from Sprint or MCI or AT&T. Yeah. Well, that's the way the electricity market is in Massachusetts now. You can, you have your, I think we're National Grid.
National Grid.
National Grid here, yes.
So National Grid is, think of it like the old New England Telephone or now Verizon, where they provided the local transport.
Yeah, they have the network.
But the generation, the actual electricity, can come from, you have a choice now. Just as you had a choice with your long distance carrier years ago, you have a choice to get your electricity from Con Ed or TransCanada, or, probably not worth it for your residential bill. But I'll tell you, about 80% of the commercial users in Massachusetts now choose their electricity provider, and they're able to bring their costs down. Now, by choosing solar, for example, you can actually create your own electricity, and you go, they call it behind the meter, so that you have electricity that you provide right to yourself, that you generate.
Comes from the sun, yeah.
And in fact, if you're generating more than you can use, you get to sell it back to the electric company.
No, back feeds to the
And they have to
electric,
buy it from you. And that's a law that we put in place. So that's not going away. So some of the more generous and favorable tax credits are clearly going to go away. So if folks are thinking about switching to solar for their business, now would be a good time. And actually, you can call me. I'm also a lawyer, and I have a client that is excellent at it, and happy to provide some information. But that's part of, I think, our overall theme, to try to make Massachusetts more business friendly. We've had some great results. We're no longer Taxachusetts, I'll tell you that. A couple of years ago, CNBC rated us, I don't know, 3rd or 6th or something in the country for a business-friendly environment. And we need to keep that in order to be competitive, to ultimately generate the jobs that our families are depending on, and bring that unemployment rate even lower than the 6%.
So it's like you said, jobs.
Jobs.
Yeah. I mean, this is what we're talking about around the Cracker Barrel.
Yes.
But
yeah.
that's what people are talking about around their kitchen tables.
That was a job. Somebody made it.
That was a job, right?
Yeah, there used to be barrel factories around. So we're getting down there in time.
Let me just tell you something interesting. I was with the governor in Avon in the industrial park, and we had a little presentation by economics professor Barry Bluestone from UMass. Came out and did a presentation talking about advanced manufacturing. And there was a statistic that really, we probably had 250 people out there, and the presentation, there was a statistic that was staggering. And I don't remember precisely. It was something like the cost differential between Massachusetts for labor and China some 30 years ago was like 60%, and now it's 6%. So our labor costs are becoming far more competitive.
So more efficient at it.
Far more efficient than we once were. And then when you add in things like transportation costs, manufacturing jobs are actually coming back to the U.S., and particularly what they call advanced manufacturing jobs, where it's person has to have a significant skill set and be able to operate a computer, and perhaps they're looking for engineers, they're looking for, but this advanced manufacturing sector, including what's happening in a couple of locations right here in the Avon Industrial Park, has like 0% unemployment. In fact, they're begging for kids. So part of our whole approach is to make the community college system, the vocational schools, our vocational high schools more robust, and prepare these children for these jobs that will continue to help grow our economy.
So again,
Jobs.
jobs.
I think we're getting
And
a
I think
signal.
we're just about done here. We've used up the time, so I want to thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Ryan, it's always good to see you, and you always have plenty to tell us.
Yeah.
And so for Jeery and I, and for Brian, we'd like to say thank you for joining us on Around the Cracker Barrel. Good night.